the West and NATO are now coalescing around a new sort of tripartite policy towards China, which is largely shared in the UK. Look at the results of the integrated review in the EU. Look at the Commission China strategy published in 2019. Look at the United States. It's based on the notion of cooperation. Yes, of course, we should cooperate with China. Why would you not? And indeed, you know, the US has demonstrated that compartmentalization, putting issues into different categories, can work. For example, John Kerry was recently in Shanghai, and despite this being the height of the US-China spat over the Uyghurs and the sanctions, he was able to get a 600-word memorandum out of the Chinese pledging that they would work together on climate change. And 2 days later, guess what? President Xi attended Joe Biden's Earth Day summit in Washington and spoke and has pledged to decarbonize by 2060. The Chinese have been very cooperative over dealing with piracy in the Gulf of Aden, sending ships. The Chinese have been cooperative over Iran with the conclusion of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The Chinese have signed up to UN sanctions against North Korea, although there's a lot of suspicions that they are secretly aiding North Korea by buying its coal and sending it foodstuffs. So, you know, do not rule out the possibility that the Chinese will be equally pragmatic. They also want to show that they're good citizens, and things like climate change and piracy give them an opportunity to do so. So the cooperation plank is definitely still there. But now we have containment. And the sense that, you know, just like the Soviet Union, even if it's not the Cold War, the West needs to look at what it can do to make it harder for China to take risks militarily and use its power aggressively. What has happened here is similar to what happened with Wilhelmine Germany at the end of the 19th century. This is an analogy which is frequently drawn, but as a historian, I think it has some credibility, because, you know, the hope was at the end of the 19th century that globalization, free trade, which was very strong at the end of the 19th century before the First World War, would sort of make war impossible, because economic interdependence would be too strong. And then very late in the day, you know, after the German naval build-up in 1890, we recognized that although that logic was strong, there was also coming out of the Kaiser's Germany a countervailing logic, which was based around a very nationalistic military caste in Potsdam, which had a much more sort of alarmist, skeptical view of the world and of Germany's decline, of the need to seize opportunities while the correlation of forces was still in its favor. And when it came to crisis management, that nationalistic military caste got the upper hand over the economic sort of bankers and traders. And that, I suppose, in containment, the belief is that we're replaying that kind of syndrome today. And that therefore we now have to start putting in place a series of measures that would make it harder for China to sort of lash out, even if it wanted to. For example, the Americans are stepping up arms sales to Taiwan and diplomatic relations. Japan, India, the US, Australia have formed a quad structure, integrating their naval forces in the Indian Ocean, in the Atlantic as well. You know, the Chinese, the South Koreans are investing in ballistic missile systems. You know, we don't yet have a kind of NATO for the Asia Pacific in terms of a formal structure. And indeed, many of the Asian countries are as much interested in an OSCE type structure, a structure which would embrace China in a security dialogue, because they want to trade with China after all, rather than a structure like NATO for the Pacific, which would be there to contain. But one does see sort of lots of elements now of an attempt to sort of decrease vulnerabilities towards China. For example, screening of Chinese direct foreign investment, the way in which the Americans have reacted very aggressively against the participation of Huawei in Western 5G technology, arguing that the data would be supplied to the Chinese government, and persuaded many countries, including the UK, not to go down that route as well. And then there's the competition track. Now, this is, to my mind, the most important. Basically, there is a realization that we cannot out-compete, if you like, confront China. getting into a Cold War arms build-up, a syndrome where the only way out is to have a big war to decide things is in nobody's interest. The cost would be absolutely horrific. And basically, if the Chinese model is successful, it's because they've sort of outcompeted us in areas where we used to be good: engineering, science, technology, innovation, new materials, the biotech area, AI. This used to be our strength, education. And if you look at the UK Integrated Review, it talks more than anything else about technology, co-creation, innovation, particularly in the wake of the Oxford University AstraZeneca vaccine development. Biden is now talking about the same thing in the United States. There's a strong sense that to if you like, win the competition against China, that is not a military arms race. It's rediscovering the roots of our own economic competitiveness. Biden talks about a foreign policy for the middle class. Everything's got to benefit, even greening the economy, technology, jobs, and so on. So, we're going to beat the Chinese by becoming ourselves again, overcoming the polarization, getting rid of the old smokestack industries, going for the green technologies, becoming the great innovators. In other words, having prosperity without production. Prosperity without production, because that, of course, is what has led to the pollution of our economies. Now, so in other words, for NATO, the third pillar, which is systemic competition, depends upon, can the West therefore organize itself to win that competition? Biden is talking, and I could talk at length about this. I don't have time this evening, guys, because I'm going to finish in just a moment. But Biden has talked interestingly about, integrating more the European and the US economies. We're not going to go back to TTIP, the old trade and investment pact, but we are looking at digital taxation, more transatlantic data exchange, lifting tariffs like Airbus tariffs or car tariffs. If we can really come up with the same legal regime, we can trade more with each other, get rid of those protectionist barriers that Trump put in. So in other words, we could have a globalized transatlantic technology market. And if we start growing by 5 and 8% a year again, we can win. I mean, you've got to remember one thing. Although the Chinese economy is now growing level with the US economy, if you look at per capita GDP, the American figure is $63,000. The Chinese GDP is $8,000, which puts it between Montenegro and Indonesia at the moment. So we have to keep things in perspective there. So in other words, and this is the camp that I'm in when it comes to, if you like, cooperation, containment, and competition, the answer lies in the competition area. We have to beat China at its own game, and therefore demonstrate that at the end of the day, it's democracy with all of its failings, as Winston Churchill pointed out, that delivers the goods.